Welcome back to Kicking It with Colette. And in this episode, we're going to talk about, Colette. Who is Colette? I know some of you are probably wondering that same question. Now, I'm a fan of quotes, and I've heard Les Brown say while he was addressing a group of potential speakers, he says, your audience only really wants to know three things. Who are you? What do you have? And why should I care? Well, in this episode, I'm going to attempt to answer that first question. Who am I? So kick it with me and let's find out. So let's just start at the beginning. I'm from South Carolina, the Myrtle Beach area. To be exact, I'm from Little River, South Carolina. That's right. I know you're probably thinking, where is that? I'll tell you exactly where it is. That is the hometown of Vanna White. Yes, I'm from the same hometown as Vanna White. That is my claim to fame. Hopefully one day me and Vanna will meet and have a North Myrtle Beach High School reunion or something fun like that. But anywho, that's where I'm from. Myrtle Beach area is, of course, predominantly white. Growing up, my experience in education and school and everything was predominantly white, even though both my parents really instilled in me African American culture. And I'm also went to an African American Episcopal church. I grew up in the AME church. So I'm constantly floating in majority white circles and getting a strong African heritage in me at the same time. And I believe that's really helped shaped who I am because it allows me to kind of operate comfortably in many different circles. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so yeah, grew up in mostly white areas. I did not have a friend that looked like me, meaning a black friend that was not related to me, until I was 9 years old. Yeah. So if people want to talk about white privilege, there it is. Like, how many white people can say that you've never had a friend that looked like you, that was not related to you until you were 9 years old? But I was in gifted and honors classes, and other black kids just weren't in those classes. So it was usually just me and my one other best friend, who I mentioned, we didn't meet until we were 9 years old. My mom was a teacher at the school, and her mom was a teacher also. So we spent a lot of time together, and we kind of understood each other. Now, like I said, my mom was a teacher, so my first job was a teacher's assistant. From the ages of about 6 years old till about 14, I was an unpaid teacher's assistant. So one thing I will always advocate for is higher paid for teachers and our education system. Like, that is something that will get me riled up in a minute. I'm not an educator, but of course my mom's an educator. My best friend is an education, and teachers are really close to my heart. So I'm always for increasing teachers' pay. But anywho, let me get off of that soapbox. So yeah, from Little River, South Carolina, when I went to college, and for me, going to college was the most natural thing. My family is college educated. Both parents, aunts and uncles on both sides of the family went to college. So that was kind of the expectation. You know, you graduate from high school, you go to college, you get a good job. You know, this is how our family operates. There was no question on if you're going to graduate from if you're going to graduate from high school. No, that was like the expected thing. It was like, you finished second grade, great. Now this third grade. Like, it was just that natural. So when I decided to go to college, I chose an HBCU. For those of you that don't know, HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. Both of my parents graduated from HBCUs, so that was the college experience that I was accustomed to. I also grew up watching A Different World, with Whitley and Dwayne. Yeah, I still love that show. That is still one of my favorite shows now, A Different World. And it's so funny because kids now say Dwayne Wade, and they're talking about the basketball player, and I keep hearing Dwayne Wayne, the mathematician, but cultural differences. So yeah, when I decided to go to college, I went to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, or for short, North Carolina A&T. Aggie Pride. Oh man, if you've never heard of North Carolina A&T, you must be under a rock, because we are the greatest HBCU, especially because our homecoming is called GHOE. It's literally called GHOE, GHOE, and it's an acronym that stands for Greatest Homecoming on Earth. Now, I'm bragging about GHOE, but I've literally been back once in like 10 years. But anywho, it doesn't mean it's any less great. So shout out to all my Aggies out there in Aggie land. And I decided to go to A&T because if I'm going to do engineering, I wanted to go to the best engineering school. So I went to A&T, and it at the time, I don't know what the stats are now, but at the time in the early 2000s, North Carolina A&T was graduating more black engineers and mathematicians than any other college or university. So if I'm going to go, I'm going to go for the best. So that's where I went. I went to A&T. I got my undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering. Now, Aggieland was some of the best times in my life, but also some of the hardest and some of the darkest. When you're 20s, you're kind of figuring out life, and I'm sure other people can attest to that also. Now, I grew up in church. I went to the St. Paul AME church. AME stands for African Methodist Episcopal. So even though grew up in a predominantly white area, its African and black culture was also a huge part of my upbringing. It was always reinforcing who I am. So I never felt less than. Even though the world will put other things on you or try to, I was being constantly reinforced by my church and by my family, and validated and empowered in my blackness. So that was never an issue for me, which I'm quite thankful of. Other people don't have that same experience, and I understand. So anyway, I went to North Carolina A&T, majored in engineering. Oh, what was I saying? Oh, yes. So while I was at college, I strayed away from going to church every Sunday, and that's what made it some of the darkest days that I've ever had. But thankfully, growing up and having that church experience, I knew how to get back to center. When you find yourself out there and straying and kind of floundering in the world, and that's another thing for parents, go ahead and put a foundation in your kids. Even if they don't follow it right now, at least show them that path so they can get back to center. And I'm thankful for growing up in the church and everything. So when I had the opportunity and free will and do whatever I want, and realized doing whatever I want is really not what it's cracked up to be, I knew how to get back. And I'm thankful for that. So going back to the church as an adult, and it's been such a solid foundation and such a molder in who I am now. But yeah, going back to A&T, I majored in engineering. Again, a male-dominated field, and also not just a male-dominated field, a white male-dominated field. Now, a lot of other women may have had issues or in the workplace and experienced discrimination and all that, but I'll have to be honest, that was not my story, and I'm thankful for it. And maybe there was some discrimination, and maybe I just didn't pay attention to it. I don't know. But I guess growing up in mostly white circles and being only black kid in the room for many of those formative years of my life, being only a black student in the classroom, it's not a big deal to me. Again, not discounting anyone else's experience because, I mean, it's real and it's traumatic. I will never discount that. But I've just been thankful that it hasn't been my story. So being kind of a hybrid and being able to operate in predominantly white spaces and predominantly black spaces, predominantly male spaces, predominantly female spaces. It's never been an issue. When I graduated from college, my first job was at a nuclear power plant. Yes, just like Homer Simpson, but not quite. Honestly, I can't tell you if it was like Homer Simpson or not, because I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons. There were several TV shows that I just was not allowed to watch. My parents were like legit parents, and certain things that just did not happen in their house, and there are certain TV shows that we just weren't allowed to watch, and The Simpsons was one of them. So I honestly couldn't compare if it was like Homer Simpson or not. I know that there was like a lot of donuts involved in The Simpsons, and yes, we did have donuts at the nuclear power plant, so that's the only relation that I could tell you. But yeah, at a nuclear power plant, and I was actually thankful working at the station that I was at that it was also very diverse. This company, they recruited at my school, which is HBCU, but they also recruited at other HBCUs, and they recruited at the University of Puerto Rico. So the engineering department was very diverse. There were lots of females, there were lots of black people, there were lots of white people, there were lots of Puerto Ricans, and it was great. And we had a lot of fun, honestly. I probably stayed there a lot longer than I normally would have, just because my coworkers were so great and we had such a good time there. And yeah, working at a nuclear power plant, honestly, it's not as cool as it sounds. Like, I say that and people are like, oh my gosh, you're an engineer at a nuclear power plant. Yes, I am. What does that mean? That means I am proficient in Excel. But well, no, it's not as glamorous as it sounds. But, it was a good job. It was a good starter. But one day I was sitting in my cubicle and I had this revelation. And I said, you know what? I can't do this for the next 30 years. There's no Christmas break. There's no spring break. There's no fall break. I get up every morning and come do this job every single day. There's no break to look forward to. And that was low-key traumatizing because when you're a student, you're like, at least I just 2 more weeks till spring break and I can just press through and everything will be fine. No, there are no mile markers like that in adult life. And that was a traumatic experience. And then I also realized I don't want to do this for the next 30 years. This can't be life. Like some of my coworkers who I respect a lot, but they've been working in the same position in the same cubicle for over 30 years. At the time, that was longer than I've been alive and completely unfathomable. And to think that these guys started doing their job before Google was a thing? How in the world? How? How did you do your job without Google? I literally Google something every single day. But that's different generations, different times. So I always knew that there was going to be a career change in my path at some point. I just didn't know when. I thought it was going to be in about 2012. I started looking for a new job and I was ready to jump ship. I was hating my job. I was hating life and everything just sucked. I call that time my quarter life crisis. And I remember one day I was walking into work, more like trudging into work, dragging my feet, and it was a gloomy day. It was probably hot and humid and just kind of day. And I said to God, you know what, God, is this the day? Is this the day I just knock over a table and walk out? Is this the day? Because I was fed up. And I told God, I said, you know what? Either get me a new job or change my heart against this one because I can't take it anymore. It was one of those I'm done type prayers. And he ended up changing my heart towards that one. What I realized during that time is if I wanted my job to be better, I had to get better, Like, yeah, my job wasn't great, but then I had to look, are you a great employee? And to be honest, I wasn't. So I took the steps that I needed to become a better employee. I made myself a to-do list every day, and I said, these are the things I will absolutely get done. I stopped carpooling so I can come in early and stay late and be more productive and do what I needed to do. And I just had to make that change internally. And yeah, the job really didn't change, but I changed, and I was much happier there because of that. But the opportunity for me to leave came a couple years later. Honestly, my grandmother had just passed away, and I was already thinking, maybe I've been here too long. I was starting to have almost anxiety attacks, panic attacks at work, where I just felt just completely overwhelmed. The work, nothing had changed. The work had not changed. There was work that I would normally be able to knock out in an hour was suddenly taking all day and was like completely arduous, and I didn't understand what was going on. And then when my grandmother passed, I realized, you know what? I can't pass my life sitting here in this cubicle. So I left. And I jokingly was telling a coworker about it. And I said, yeah, this whole experience, I'm going to blog about it. And that was a genius idea. So I started a blog called Resigned at 29 because I was 29 years old at the time and I resigned from my job. And it had a nice little ring to it. So I started blogging about my experience resigning from a job and the lessons that I was learning along the way. So yeah, resignedat29.com. The blog is actually still up if you want to hear more about that story. And in my first post, I talked about having the right amount of crazy. And the right amount of crazy is being crazy enough to do something, to make a big change, and optimistic enough to know that it'll work out for the better. And I came up with the right amount of crazy actually from my sister. I was telling her I was leaving my job and she was like, that sounds crazy. And I said, no, what's crazy is going to a job for 40 hours plus a week and hating it and it's just killing you. That's just crazy. And she says, well, I guess you have to have the right amount of crazy. And I was like, yes, that is perfect. I'm totally using it and I'm running with it. And I actually have it on the t-shirt, the right amount of crazy. So if you want to know more about that story, check it out, rosanda29.com. Okay, I have to interrupt this podcast to give you a disclaimer. Now, I did not resign from my job haphazardly. That decision was made after much prayer and supplication. So do not just go resigning from your job just because you heard it here. Okay? If you feel like you should leave your job, pray about it first, because that's a huge decision to make. And there's a lot of financial risk involved in which you will pay for, literally. So if you think you should leave, pray about it first. Resign responsibly. And in there, I talk about the lessons I learned, the lessons in faith, the lesson in trusting in who I am, who God's made me to be, and trusting that there's a plan and that it's all worked out. And I'll have to say that, yeah, it all did work out. So from Resign at 29, I started volunteering at my church, and that volunteer position turned into a full-time position. Now, when I first left my job, one of the things I wanted to do, well, I thought I wanted to do, was to go to culinary school. Okay, I would go to culinary school, get my degree, and work in a restaurant, be a chef, and it was going to be awesome because I like to cook and I love watching the Food Network. It was like my favorite thing to watch on TV. So my church owns a cafe, and I started working there, and I worked my way up from being a server to I've worked every single position and eventually became the manager. And I worked every position, including cooking in the position. And doing that, I realized I do not want to go to culinary school. I do not want to cook as a career. So whenever people ask me about that, I say, yeah, no, I scratched that itch. So in a life's journey of trying to figure out what you want to do, part of that is learning what you do not want to do. So I count it as a win, though, so I can check it off on my list that, yes, I have cooked in a restaurant before. I have been a restaurant cook. My cooking is that good. I have been validated. That is something I do not want to do anymore. Cooking is a hobby, not a lifestyle. Lesson learned. Now, one of the things about me is that I don't drink. I don't drink alcohol at all. I used to. I used to drink in college when things are a little bit dark. But I stopped drinking, not because I got back into church. Of course, people would say, oh, that's why you should do it. But to be honest, that just means they're just not going to drink in front of you. There are a lot of people, Christians, that still drink and do whatever. Whatever your beliefs and convictions are, that's fine. Do you, boo-boo. As I like to say, let every man live by his own convictions and die by his own decisions. So do you. But I decided not to drink anymore because wisdom is something that I want to aspire to. It's something that's always been interesting to me. I read the book of Proverbs. I've read it several times. I can't even count how many times I've read the book of Proverbs. It is one of my favorite books in the Bible. But I was reading Proverbs 31. And no, I'm not talking about the Proverbs 31 woman. I mean, she sounds awesome. She's great and all. But no. Actually, at the beginning of Proverbs, there are sayings from King Lemuel's mother to King Lemuel. And it's just some words of wisdom. And in there, she says, drinking isn't for kings, my son. You know, drinking, if you're a king shouldn't be lured away by drink. This is the Colette translation. You go look it up, but this is off the top of my head. So King Lemuel's mother is exhorting him not to drink, and that drinking is not for kings. And that if kings are led astray by alcohol and strong drink, that they may forget their decrees. And it's the king's responsibility to have justice and stand up for those who cannot stand for themselves. And that if a king is led astray by drink, then he'd be led astray from doing that. And then she goes further to say that drinking is for the perishing. So let them drink and remember their sorrows no more. And man, that hit me. Drinking is for the perishing. So let them drink and remember their sorrows no more. So from that day forward, I decided that I was not perishing. I will not perish. I'm living in this life. And if drinking is for the perishing, then I will not drink. No matter how hard life gets, no matter how dark things seem. And yeah, since I discovered that verse, I have hit some pretty low valleys, to be honest. But I decided I would never drink again because drinking is for the perishing, and I would not accept that position of the perishing. So therefore, I will not take a drink, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it seems like. I am a king. And now you're thinking, well, Colette, you're female. Don't you mean you're the queen? No, no, no. I'm the king. You know why I say that? Because the queen is still subject to the king. So I'm the king. And the Bible also says that we are kings and priests. We're seated in heavenly places with Christ. And also says that, when in the spirit, there's no Jew, no Greek, no male, no female, no Hebrew, no Gentile. So in the spirit, yes, I have the power to be a king and a priest, and I will not drink. So from that day forward, and it's been couple years now, man. I would say about 8 years. I didn't clock it, but it's probably been about 8 years since I last had alcohol, because from there on I decided I'm gonna be a king. If the option to be a king in this earth is there, then I was gonna take it, and I'm going to operate it in a kingly way as much as I can, and I'll aspire to wisdom as much as I can. So yeah, in my pursuit of wisdom, I also read a lot. As I mentioned before, my background is in engineering, but ironically, English and literature were actually my favorite subjects. Those are my best subjects. I was only a B.C. student when it comes to math. But again, that was honors math. As one of my classmates told me in my grad program, he says, you know what? You're really not like most engineers I know. You're just smart enough to finish the program. And that is exactly right. So I like English and I like reading. Two of my favorite authors are C.S. Lewis and Ayn Rand. Now, if you're familiar with either of them, they're two very different people. C.S. Lewis wrote a lot of Christian works, and Ayn Rand is an atheist. And I like both of them because they're both thinkers. And Ayn Rand, she's a very good author. Even though her characters are generally atheists and her philosophies are explaining her atheistic philosophy, and I'm okay with that. See, my thing is, I can appreciate a well thought out argument, even if you are wrong. I appreciate that you took the time to at least think about it. I read the Bible not just because I'm a Christian, but because, to be honest, well-meaning people will give you bad information. And I like to read things for myself. So when the pastor's talking, now they may be giving you some good points, but I always, just because it sounds right doesn't mean it is right. So I like to read stuff on my own. So I make it a point to read the Bible, and I read it for context, and I read before and after, whatever scriptures the pastor's quoting or whomever is quoting. I always read it for myself and I can validate it. I don't believe anything unless I can validate it personally. I don't like to say, well, so-and-so said this and that. Nah, man, I check for myself. Literacy is a thing. So, and being African American and having the ability to read now, I will read. Another thing is, people would like to derive different processes and things and schools of thought based off of other classic works of literature. I realized this when I was in business school. Oh, that's another thing. Went to business school. I have a master's degree in business administration. Woo, shout out to me. So I decided to read The Prince to see if I would come to the same conclusion as all these other people that are writing textbooks and other sorts of processes and whatever off of this book. I wanted to read the original to see if I would come to the same conclusion, or to see if you were just full of crap, for lack of a better word. So yeah. So also you'll hear me talk about things when I make allusions to books or scriptures or whatever. I may not say exactly where it came from. I'll give you a roundabout because I do that intentionally. I want people to look it up. Just because it sounds right doesn't mean it is right. Look it up. Like, I've had this happen before where I've heard someone use a word that I didn't know. And it's like, oh, I like that word. That sounds good. I think I'll use it. But what I always do first is look it up. Because I've had this happen where someone said a word and I wanted to use it, but I looked it up just to make sure I had the right meaning. And I found out that the person that used the word used it incorrectly. So don't be out here looking crazy. Now, that other person probably heard that word from someone too and used it in the same context, but they didn't do the work themselves and did not look it up and used it incorrectly. Now, other people in the room were probably impressed by the word. I liked the word too, which caused me to look it up. But once I did, I was like, wait a minute, you use this word wrong. So people, start doing your own research. So yeah, that's part of who Colette is too. Colette likes to do her own research. Colette likes to come to her own conclusion. Colette does not like to be on the bandwagon. Well, folks, that's a little of my story. Hopefully that gives you a better idea of who I am. Everyone sees the world through a unique lens. I felt it was important for my listeners to see through mine. If we take the time and effort to pull back the lens, we would see that we are more alike and would have more compassion for one another. But I'll discuss that more in a future episode. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story? That's an ode to my first episode of Hamilton. Check that out if you haven't already, and share it with a Hamilton fan. Bye now.